Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome to the stage Mr. Joe Manganiello and
Thank you. Thank you, COAF. I can't tell you how honored I am to be here and to be celebrating my Armenian roots with all of you. I had no idea how much impact simply telling my great-grandmother's story of survival out of the Armenian genocide of 1915. I had no idea how much impact that it would have. And I had no idea how underrepresented the story of the Armenians was in the public. Since 1915 and even before that, the Turkish government refuses to acknowledge the Armenian genocide and the massacre of over 1.5 million Armenians. Every single Armenian has a story like mine. Every one of us carries this survivor's gene like I do. And for those of you that don't know, my great-grandmother woke up one day in 1915. Her husband was murdered, her family was murdered, her neighbors were murdered, and she was shot and left for dead. As she laid there on the ground, she heard another 7 gunshots go off that were her 7 children. She laid there unmoving. After the Turks left the house, she got up and she gathered up the 8th child, an infant who was left to starve to death in the crib. She put the child on her back, took an article of clothing from each one of her slain children with a bullet in her, escaped past the death marches, and swam across a river with the 8th child on her back. When she reached the other side, the child had drowned. She lived in a cave with other refugees, and I guess the way the story goes, the gunshot wound got so bad that she had to come back down out of the mountains and was put into a camp, a relocation camp. There, after everything she had been through, she was impregnated by a German officer who was stationed in Turkey at the time. The German officer left her there to fend for herself, pregnant. She gave birth to the child, and there's something incredible happened, at least for me, as far as this story goes. My mother, who was very young when she met her great-grandmother, she would say this, there was this word that my great-grandmother would repeat, and it was the word for angel, preshtak. She would call her mother, my grandmother, the German Armenian baby that was born in that camp, her angel. She didn't see it as a curse. She saw it as the reason for her to keep living. And for me, that answers every question I've ever had about spirituality. And in that tale, it also teaches me that the genocide wasn't God's will. This was the will of people, of humans. And my great-grandmother believed. She never stopped believing in a God and praying to a God that helped her survive with this baby who was my grandmother. My grandmother died at age 40 of lupus, an autoimmune condition. And we now have lots of empirical data that shows us that autoimmune conditions and addiction are rife throughout the descendants of genocide and Holocaust survivors. So even after 100 years after this travesty, our children still feel the impact of what happened. We all know what happened. We don't need to wait for someone to admit it. We know what happened to our family. We have to heal. And that's easy to say when there's not killing going on in our world today. And so when I stop and I think about what's going on in Artsakh and what's going on to the Armenians today, I wonder how can we get through it? You know, these ancient conflicts are all over the newspapers today, except the Armenians aren't the ones with the aircraft carrier coming to our rescue. We aren't the ones with $3 billion worth of aid. So what do? We gather like we did here tonight and share the culture, stories, the religion, the language, the food that these strong women who had to survive these unspeakable evils carried on their backs so that we could all exist. People say to me all the time, you have such strong women in your family. And I say, yes, well, because all the men were dead. It was up to the women, no matter what happened to them. They had to continue on. They had to keep this culture alive. So I just want to thank my great-grandmother. I want to thank all of the other survivors who survived so that we could all exist here in the diaspora. And I urge everyone to continue passing along that culture, to meet in groups like this, to pass on the food, the religion, the language. It's how we stay alive, and it's how we will continue on forever. No matter what happens in the world, Armenian culture will be here forever because of organizations like COAF. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. You can make a difference. Please reach deeply tonight and give to such a great organization. Thank you so much. I'm so proud to be here. Thank you.